Welcome. My name is Leanne Wolf. I am the Associate Director of the Northern Plains Ethics Institute, as well as a principal of the Great Outcomes Consulting. And I teach over at Concordia too, so lots going on in my world. Welcome to those of you who are in the room, and welcome to those of you who are online. Let me just start with a little bit about the Northern Plains Ethics Institute. I think it's always good to get grounding in that. The Northern Plains Ethics Institute, NPEI, at North Dakota State University is the only ethics institution in North Dakota and the Northern Plains. It was founded in 2000 by North Dakota State University professors, local community leaders, and the North Dakota State Board of Higher Education. The NPEI engages locally, regionally, nationally, and internationally in its mission to promote democratic participation in social and ethical issues affecting the Northern Plains and beyond. The NPEI fulfills its charge by bringing together citizens from around the world in diverse, civil, rigorous discussions, workshops, and trainings focusing on what kind of society we want to live in and how to go about creating it. And I think it's worth repeating that last sentence because it is the grounding on which we're going to have the conversation today. And that is focusing on what kind of society we want to live in and how to go about creating it. So that's the Northern Plains Ethics Institute. And I am delighted to have the opportunity to introduce you to your speaker for the day. Dr. Rupak Gandhi is the superintendent of Fargo Public Schools, and he will be talking about ethical issues in education. Dr. Gandhi has served as the Fargo Public Schools superintendent of schools since July 2018. In October of 2022, he was named the 22-23 North Dakota Superintendent of the Year by the North Dakota Council of Educational Leaders. Dr. Gandhi completed his undergraduate education studies in political science at Texas A&M. It's a cult. Holds a master's degree in special education from the Grand Canyon University and holds his doctorate in educational leadership from the Northwest Nazarene University. Dr. Gandhi has continued his professional education past his doctorate by completing the AASA National Superintendent Certification Program, the AASA USC Urban Superintendent's Academy, Standards Institutes, the HWC Executive Leadership Institute, Texas Region 4 Superintendent Academy, and the Harvard School of Business of Education UDL Summer Institute. So we can tell he not only is a superintendent, he's a lifelong learner as well. Professionally, Dr. Gandhi serves on the AASA Governance Committee, North Dakota K through 12 Education Coordination Council, North Dakota School Study Council, and North Dakota Council of Educational Leaders Legislative Focus Group. He is also a mentor for the AASA National Superintendent Certification Program. This event is sponsored by the NPEI, North Dakota State University School of Humanities, College of Arts and Sciences, and the Dakota Digital Academy and Tri-College University. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gandhi to talk to us about education in ethics.
Good morning. Thank you all for having me here today to speak on issues related to ethics in education and educational leadership specifically. I want to commend the work of the Northern Plains Ethics Institute. Got to learn a lot more in preparation for this presentation, and really excited about just the promotion of democracy and the promotion of dialogue to make sure that we can always work to make our society better. I appreciate the kind introduction, and I appreciate some of the accolades that were shared about my previous experiences. Please know that if we want to truly fulfill the mission of NPEI, I believe that all decisions and conversations that we present today should be scrutinized, should be questioned. So while I appreciate the professional experiences that have landed me here, I would think that I am no more or no less qualified than any other educational leader that continues to face a lot of the challenges that I'll present on today on a day-to-day basis. So I'm grateful to be here today, and really want to just kind of start with a little bit of an introduction and an agenda to talk through what will this look like today. When I was preparing for this presentation, and it was kind of shared with me, can you talk about ethical issues in educational leadership? Do you mind changing the slide? One of the things that I focused on was first, just I'm a political science major and a philosophy minor from Texas A&M University. So I love philosophy, I love sociology, I love psychology, all things that allow us to be able to study behavior, study the way we think, study the way we learn. It is just something that is a passion point of mine. So I first thought about breaking down some common issues that we see day to day in the world of education, specifically K-12 education, into the most common ethical frameworks. So I had originally created this PowerPoint by first taking a look at some of the recent issues that we in our public schools and in our community, or seeing what school districts across the nation are dealing with, and broke them down into, okay, if I were to use a consequential framework, here's an ethical dilemma to consider. Or if I were to use a utilitarian framework, get intelligent framework, and break down the issue that way. That's how I originally prepared this PowerPoint. But then I went back and really took a look at the Northern Plains Institute, what the mission is, and what the purpose of today's conversation really is. And that is to really invite all citizens to have a voice within some of the climate ethical issues that we see. So I'm shifting the presentation to focus on schools, and here's this item codes we use and why. Instead of just talk through some of the issues that we've gone through, maybe the type of study ethics, or it's ethics, how our folks have addressed in the last couple of years what our thought process was at that point in time, but then really throws it back to you as a question is, if you had to make today, would you make the same decision? Would you apply the same level of ethics, same study of ethics as well? And I think that's critically important, because to be a true lifelong learner, to be an organization that is committed to becoming a learning organization that wants to get better day to day, it's important that we're reflective and we're introspective. And the study of ethics, the study of ethical dilemmas, that we don't get participation as well. So the way today's presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions and answers at the end as well. But I'll go through just pulling from the NPEI website, going through just some basic ethical frameworks, and what does that look like in K-12 education, and then try to pose it with a dilemma or a question for your consideration as well.
So, Dr. Gandhi, can you raise your large lapel mic up? Some mine are having difficulty.
Is this better?
We'll find out. I think that should work. Thank you.
So for the folks online, using this, anything that important, just Fargo Public Schools is a great place to be. My bosses are watching online. All I did was give accolades for the last 10 minutes or something of that nature. I wanted to start today's presentation by really looking at the fundamental questions for NPEI.
There's an issue with that microphone. They said it wasn't any better. I'll give you this one instead.
Turn the other one off.
Yes, you can turn off.
Oh. Does this work? All right, we'll go ahead and just get started, and if you don't mind changing the slide whenever it works. So really wanted to start today's presentation by looking at the fundamental questions that the Northern Plains Ethic Institute really revolves their work around. And that is, what kind of world do we want to live in and how do we get there? In my opinion, and I believe based on the mission of our organization, we believe that education is one of those institutions that has a critical role in shaping how we answer those questions. Education is the profession that we believe is a starting point for every other profession, but we also believe that it's going to be one of the longest standing institutions that can adapt and provide a service that's critically important for our citizenship over a long period of time. Educational institutions as public institutions um, have often been the largest employers of their community for the last hundreds of years, and we don't anticipate our work to go away, even though we do anticipate the way we do our work and what the role of education is to shift over time. And I think being able to reflect on that and to be able to think about where is it that we are today and where is it that we want to go is critically important to be able to answer the question of what is the kind of world that we want to live in and how do we get there. The most pragmatic example I can give to that is something that I've been sharing a lot lately as we talk about the shift of technology and the advancement of information in education. When my parents were K-12 students, the rate at which information doubled within society was significantly lower than what it is now. And we've gone from periods of months in which information doubles or access to information doubles to a period of hours. And I think that has significantly shifted the role of education, not just K-12 education, but higher ed education as well. There was a period of time where the primary information that was shared with the student or a student received or any of our citizenship received was through schooling. And I think that even to a period of my own K-12 experiences, the primary source of knowledge I received was a transference of knowledge that happened at a school building. That's no longer the case in 2023, and it's really important to be able to recognize that as well. I think in today's society, our students have access to information, whether or not they're in schools, and that has shifted the work of education to be able to focus on how do you critically think, process the information that's available to you, analyze whether that information is accurate, biased, or not, and then be able to apply that information to solve real world problems. So I don't think that education of today is the education of yesterday, because I don't think that we are solely dependent on the transference of knowledge. I think we're now dependent on teaching students, if we want to be able to move forward, to analyze and think about the information that's already accessible to them. But I also don't think that's the education of tomorrow. And I think being able to be reflective, introspective, and aware of our surroundings, our community, and our culture is going to be the only way that as an institution, we are able to move forward as well. So when we take a look at what kind of world do we want to live in and how do we get there from the lens of K-12 education, two of the most important questions for us is, what is the importance of equity in education? We're going to talk about equity a little bit later, but what does that mean when we strive to say the term equity? There's a common meme that's often used in educational circles about the difference between equality and equity. And it's been used for years in terms of being able to define the difference. But I think that sometimes even then we overuse the term equity because we try to apply it to every principle and every notion versus really thinking about the larger question of what is that ultimate measure of success for us? Because what is it that we want to see ourselves when we look at ourselves as a member of our society? And we have to view all of our students in the same light. The second question that's critically important to the world of K-12 education is, what is our role in shaping the educational world for the next generation? And this question is important because as an educator, you have a choice every single day. You have a choice to wake up and make a decision on, do you believe that you can impact education for students, or do you believe that your ability to educate a student is based solely on their own circumstances? And I'm not sitting here going to tell you that there aren't factors that impact student achievement. There aren't factors that impact the way students learn. We absolutely recognize that. But I will tell you that I will never believe that I would show up to work if there was a lost cause. And I think that all educators have to use that mindset when they enter this profession, because if you don't believe that you have the ability and it is your role to impact the future of the next generation, then I think your purpose is going to be diminished in your own self-efficacy. And that's very much research-based as well. We often look in the world of education at some of the biggest leading researchers on what impacts student achievement and how do students learn, whether they're in K-12, higher ed, or any other educational setting. And the number one expectation and the number one influence for student achievement time and time again is the expectations of the instructor. And so one of the big pushes for us is to make sure that no matter what someone's circumstances are, no matter what we believe to be the reality of why someone may or may not be showing academic progress or social emotional progress at that moment in time, we don't lower our expectations, because the minute we lower our expectations for students, we're diminishing our role as an educator, because we're lowering the standard and we're subsequently lowering our ability to use education as a tool to shape the next world and the next generation. And it can go even worse, because what we can do is start shaping students to lower expectations for themselves and hold themselves to lower standards as well. So those are some of the things that we focus on a day-to-day basis. So I spoke a little bit earlier about just the study of ethics. Ethics isn't just about understanding what's right or wrong. It's about using it as a tool to make decisions. With that framework in mind, we'll talk through several dilemmas today, or ethical considerations that K-12 school districts follow. Think about what's the tool that you're going to use to make that decision. Earlier this summer, I spoke at TEDx Fargo and gave a speech called Defining Your Standard. And the premise of my speech was, when you make a decision, the root of that decision, you have to be able to communicate your why. And it is, why are you doing what you're doing? And define your standard, because we all have a different standard of success. And if we can't communicate that this is the standard I'm using to make this decision, then we get influenced by outside sources that may not be reflective of our values. It may not be reflective of where we want to go as a society, and it may not be reflective of what our ultimate goal is as well. So education isn't just about understanding what's right and wrong. It's about being able to use the tools to determine, how do I determine what is right or wrong? And that's going to really be the premise of our conversation today. If you don't mind going to the next slide. And actually, I think we're going to be on the normative ethics slide more. So normative ethics can be broken down into deontological and utilitarian approaches. And for those of you that are familiar with both of those concepts, deontology is based on the concept of duty. What is the right duty and what is not? Utilitarianism is a philosophical approach, also an ethical framework, based on the concept of the greatest good for the greatest number. So when we take a look at school districts on a day-to-day basis, we have to constantly debate the difference between what is our duty and then what is the greatest good for greatest number. I shared earlier that we'll come back to this concept of equity. And equity is critically important, because I define equity as making sure that giving every student what he or she deserves to be able to be successful and have the same opportunity for educational success, what we call educational justice, as their peers in our school system. I don't determine that to mean equality, meaning every school gets the same resources, every student gets the same resources. To us in Fargo Public Schools, one of the biggest debates or ethical dilemmas facing this concept of equity was when we recently opened up our first Setting D special education service school in the state of North Dakota. The school at the time was about a $14 million building, which for public resources is a significant amount to serve a much larger or much smaller student population than any of our other comprehensive high schools. However, for us, the consideration wasn't around just making sure that we distribute resources across the board evenly. It was making sure that we fundamentally believe that some students need more, they deserve more, not because of any of their own characteristics that are in their control, but just because every student deserves the opportunity to have a quality education. And your upbringing, your disability, your zip code, none of those pieces should really be a barrier, in our opinion, to prevent you from getting a high quality education. And if that means that some students are going to have a greater allocation of district resources because of challenges that are beyond their control to get to the same level, or hopefully the same level of success or opportunities for success as their counterparts, then that's what we're going to do in education as well. So this concept of duty, which is the duty of educating every child, which you can use as a baseline or minimum duty, versus the greatest good for greatest number, is often a debate when you look at any set of limited resources, time, and energy. We believe that our system is a product of the results that we get are a product of our system. And we believe that until we change our system, we're not going to get a difference in results. But we also know that our system is designed based on limitations. Those limitations are resources, their time, their energy, they're your focus. So as a school district, one of the constant dilemmas that we have is how do we prioritize our duties that we might believe that every child deserves versus the limitation of resources when you have conflicting priorities that come day to day. And that is something that we often use. We try to take a look at each individual issue when we make some of these decisions. And we do try to put it in a framework of, is this a matter of or the greatest good for the greatest number, which does ultimately mean that you're sacrificing some students if you are only looking at the greatest good, or is this a fundamental duty that every child deserves? And when you have a limited pot of resources, those are the questions that you have to have on a day-to-day basis. Those are some of the things that we work with in Fargo Public Schools. Next slide. We also often deal with the concept of applied ethics, which helps us take theoretical frameworks to the world of normative ethics and then apply them to our real world situations. The best real world situation I can give you in terms of applied ethics is really going back to this concept again of duty versus greatest good versus duty versus what's the greatest good for the greatest number. Recent examples in Fargo Public Schools, the first one I'll come up with is a student dress code. We, over the last 4 years, have significantly shifted our student dress code to be something that's not traditional compared to most other North Dakota school districts. About 4 years ago, it was brought to our attention that our dress code was not gender neutral because there were many different aspects of our dress code that specifically favored our male students versus our female students because they prohibited certain clothing that female students couldn't wear for the concept of distraction. So the way this was brought to us was we had a community member start a Facebook group called hashtag I am not a distraction. And the premise of that Facebook group was, why are we penalizing students, young females, for what they're wearing? Because we believe that they're a distraction to a male student population. It was a wonderful conversation that really had us take a look at our own policies and practices introspectively and take a look at what can we do as an organization to shift. So the conversation and the ethical dilemma for us became, what is our duty versus what is the common good or the perception of common good at that time? The perception of common good at that time, especially compared to other school districts that did not take on what I will now call as liberal of a dress code policy that we now have in Fargo, was that there is a standard of decorum that K-12 students have. The perception at that time was that if you allow, I'll just give it, for example, midriffs to be shown, that it's going to cause a level of distraction in your school. There was a perception of common good at that time that said being able to wear sleeveless shirts for young females is more distracting and hurtful to the educational environment than it is for a male that might be allowed to wear a sleeveless shirt as well. None of those things are true. We talk to students, we talk to adults, we talk to parents, and for us, ultimately, our conversation came down to the focus of what is right. And for us, if we truly believe that the results that we get as a system are a product of our system itself, then we can't expect our results to change if our system is designed to diminish one gender over the other. And we had to work extremely hard to change the mental models of our administrators, of our parents, of our community, to truly look back and say, what does decorum mean if I were to use an objective lens to that? What does distraction mean if I were to try to define that as objectively as possible without leaving it to the subjective discretion of male adults in that school building? When you're unable to answer that question, you really start to identify what your duty is as a school and as a school district. And at that point in time, we realized what the real problem that we wanted to solve was. The real problem we wanted to solve was making sure that if there truly is a distraction, that is what we address within the school building, but the dress code wasn't causing the distraction. What the dress code was causing was a discomfort for someone because of what their own perception is of what decorum should be, or what their own perception is of how students should dress. The end product for us is that now we have one of the most liberal dress codes that is available in K-12 school districts, probably in our state and a couple of our neighboring states as well. But our student behavior incidents haven't magnified. The amount of distractions in our buildings haven't magnified. We haven't had any outcry. All we've had is students that can more freely express themselves. We've countered a culture of creating a system where young females have to feel like they can't express their own individuality based on the perceptions of counterparts that may or may not be distracted. And we've given everyone the right to free expression within the school building, as long as it's not something that truly would be a distraction to the school environment. And those are the type of dilemmas that we deal with, but that was just be one example of a practical world application. It's a very similar situation with discipline. The way you're disciplined at home, or what your concept of discipline may be, could be different for every student based on who their parents are, based on their own upbringings, based on their family situation, based on their culture. Within a school system, oftentimes we get criticized or analyzed in terms of how we approach our conversations with students. And one of the biggest questions or things that we often hear as a school district administrator will be, if a child or a student did something outside of the school building, they wouldn't get as many chances as they do here. Our position has always been, school is a place to learn. And if you don't provide an opportunity for students on how to learn, even from their own infractions, then where else can they learn? We don't believe that we are here to set a standard of expectation that we believe should universally exist. We believe that we are here to teach each student and meet them where they are, so then they can be a successful product, or they can be a successful citizen within our society down the road. And so we've created a philosophy that we believe in, which is we're going to address every disciplinary infraction within our school system through the lens of a restorative practice. And what that means is that when a disciplinary infraction occurs, we are now starting to shift our organization to get rid of any deterrence-based consequence and focus solely on what is the harm that was caused by this infraction and how do you repair that harm. Because we believe that the value of the education of teaching the harm and repair is going to be far more meaningful and beneficial, and most importantly aligned to our mission of educating students, than it is through a deterrence model of not repeating a certain infraction again. So those are just some of the ways that of ethical dilemmas that we deal with as we approach student discipline. Next slide. And lastly, not lastly, but second to last, we want to talk a little bit about just meta ethics as well. Meta ethics is a place where I love to live because it allows us to ask the question of why. I think that within the world of leadership, Oftentimes, we try to look at everything that we do from the world of where are my lowest hanging fruit and how can I maximize efficiency. Sometimes the problem with doing that is that it allows us to overgeneralize a solution that doesn't focus on the specific root of an issue. How this applies to ethical issues in education is going back to what I shared earlier about equity and educational justice. Fargo Public Schools is a high performing school district compared to several different metrics that you can take a look at. We have ACT scores that exceed state and national averages. We have graduation rates that are comparable, if not higher, than many state and national schools. Year after year, we have many schools that are consistently outperforming other school districts or are receiving tremendous amount of accolades. But those aren't the standards of success for us. The standards of success for us go granular and they go granular because the standard of success for us is each individual student. We understand that when you try to overgeneralize something that's working or not, or create cause and effect relationships that truly may not be specific to each individual student that you're entitled or you have the responsibility to serve within your organization, then that allows us to mass data. I've been in Fargo Public Schools in my role for this is my 6th school year, and I have been really proud of a lot of the work that we've done, but I'm just as ashamed of where we haven't moved the needle and some of the students that we've underserved. Like I mentioned earlier, we have a graduation rate that does pretty well, and there's room for improvement. We know that, but definitely something that we could rest on our laurels if we wanted to. But when you break down our graduation rate to some of our young men of color, some of our students that have been on an individualized education plan, our Native American students, it's a different story. It's a significant amount more of work that we have to do to be able to know that we get to where we want to be as a school system. So it's really working on shifting the focus of the members of our organization and our stakeholders to recognize we have to go a level deeper. So whenever we see a problem, one of the roles, one of the pieces that we go through is we employ a tactic called use the 5 why analysis. So if someone tells you that something exists, ask why, then ask why again, and keep doing that until you hit that 5th question. So then you can go deeper and deeper and deeper to identify what your issues really are. Similar to what we talked about, dress code, decorum, and distractions. And that's where meta ethics plays a significant part of K-12 education. So what does that do for comparisons of schools? It makes it extremely difficult to be able to create a universal principle for what we think all schools should be in all schools or how all schools should operate. I fundamentally believe that there isn't a public school district in America that doesn't have strengths that other schools can copy or emulate, and they don't have opportunities for growth. But yet we live in a comparative culture where we believe that one school has to be better than another. And what that does is that overgeneralizes solutions that may be true for some students or narratives that may be true for some students, but not all students. And the reality is we have to be able to go a deeper level to figure out what are minimum expectations of education that every school district should offer. And then we should allow each school district to operate independently to make sure that as long as they're meeting those minimum expectations, they're working harder and more every single day for the kids that are not benefiting from their system. And that's critically important, not just in K-12 education, but the concept of meta ethics is important for every organization, because if we can't understand what are those universal principles that we should all be held accountable to, then we're feeding the spirit of competition more than we are of our own growth and development for the clients that we are here to serve. In which case, for Fargo Public Schools, it's our students that are in our buildings every single day. Lastly, if I were to take a look at the study of ethics through the lens of relativism and objectivism, the conversation becomes really focused around cultural diversity and inclusion, right? We know that you often have a wide variety of perspectives. Currently in 2023, public education is under fire. public education has been politicized more over the last several state, local, and national elections than it ever has before, because it's become something, a marker of people's identity. People define public education or their views on public education not based on their own experiences, not based on the experiences of their students, but now more than ever, we're having people define public education based on their party allegiance. And when you live in a two-party society that promotes dichotomy, what you don't promote is individual growth. You promote cultural identity and confirmation bias. And this is something that we deal with more now than we ever have before, especially prior to COVID, because of the ongoing culture wars. But it is also something that we have to be able to recognize and analyze both through the lens of ethics and then what is our fundamental duty as a school district. I often say this to individuals that think that public educational systems or school systems are often influencing students. I don't know of any school district in America that has a consistent pattern of how every one of their 18-year-olds graduate, or how every one of their 18-year-olds vote the minute they graduate from their building. So if school districts are promoting one thought versus critical thought, we are failing extremely poorly, because voting records show diversity in thought. They show critical thinking. They show a wide variety of students coming after every graduating class that have differing opinions, but respect for one another. They don't show one level of quote unquote indoctrination or belief or thought of what people believe in. So being able to recognize that and recognize your role as an institution versus community perspective falls into the realm of identifying relativism versus objectivism, but it's also one of those ethical considerations that we as a school district face on a day-to-day basis. I wanted to start today by just talking through a few handful of considerations, but like I said before, I think the purpose of NPEI has always been to focus on democratic participation and conversation. So I am going to yield the rest of the time for questions and answers and talk about what are ethical issues that you may have questions about as it relates to the field of K-12 education, or open up the floor for any questions that you may have.
This is where it's going to get interesting because we have only one mic now. So we're going to pass it back and forth between the people asking questions and Dr. Gandhi. So let's start. Oh, I see a hand go up. I'm going to give one recommendation, and that is I use specific norms when I am facilitating a group. And the first norm is always respect the speaker. The second one is question the content. So here we go.
Mine isn't actually so much a question, but more expressing that I commend your changing of that dress code. Our daughter graduated from North High 4 years ago, and in grade 11, there was one day that she went into school with ultra short shorts just because her friend had gotten under fire for wearing too short shorts. So their way of dealing with that was that they had 10 friends all coming in with too short shorts, so that if they got expelled, there would have to be 10 kids getting expelled, and it didn't happen. And I mean, I can totally sympathize how difficult it must be in North Dakota to relax dress codes where yeah, that does not fit with the mindset. And yeah, I'm not surprised that took a substantial portion of your presentation. It's something that I guess at NDSU we can't really, we don't really come across that, but yeah, it was a big issue. So I commend you on your response.
And I think related to that, you talked about decorum, and there was one other word that you used, distraction. And distraction. So you said you had to identify what those meant. Could you talk a little bit about what you discovered decorum to mean versus distraction? Expand on that.
Sure, I'll expand on that. Unfortunately, I'm not able to answer the question because what we figured out is that everyone has a different standard for decorum or distraction. So ultimately, our discovery was rooted in the fact that we realized that you can't create an objective standard for decorum or distraction because it is subjective. And when it becomes subjective, it allows for bias. So using the example that an audience member gave about students protesting by wearing short shorts because one student got in trouble and 10 students wanted to come wearing that, what we learned is that we thought that that was problematic during the school day to have shorts that are a certain length. But then if you go 3 hours later at 3:45 for volleyball practice or see the dance team practice, it's not a problem when it's for entertainment of others, right? So there is no standard of decorum or what is a distraction and when it is without subjectivity. And those are the reasons why we had to resort back to what is our duty versus what is the perception of common good.
Thank you. Yes.
So in a school where the administration has no expectations, but the teachers do, how do you help the students to learn when the administration won't back up those teachers' expectations?
Feel free to ask her another question.
Yeah, no, I think at the end of the day, it's no different work than any organization anywhere else. I think it's making sure that how can leadership really define what the vision and the ultimate outcome is. Uh, I think to your question specifically, when a teacher feels like there isn't an administrator backing them up, I would want to dive deeper into the issue and say, okay, what is it that we're not backing it up to, and really identify what the difference is. This goes back to a little bit of what I shared earlier is if you don't have a unified vision and common goal that you're working towards, and we have a lot of work to do within our organization. We're working on a lot of goal to goal and work to goal alignment so that our system is focusing in the same direction. You're going to have different individuals that have conflict and then they rest on the conflict versus resting on the work and how to get to where you want to get to. So a year and a half ago, we did a training right after school ended with about 175 different educators from all levels, from teachers to administrators to central office staff. And the last part of the training, every single one of them was asked a question, what does a successful school year look like to you? And out of the 175 respondents, we had 138 different definitions. And what that showed us is that our system is a series of different improvement markers with a whole bunch of educators that care about kids, but they're all focused on different things. And that's what leads to conflict if you aren't unable to define what are those universal measures of success that we all agree on and that we're focusing on, and then let individuals approach their own way. At the end of the day, my conversation with the principal would be, is this because of similar to decorum, something that you think this is the way a teacher should teach where this conflict is? Or is this truly because you can show that it's negatively impacting students? And if so, then use the data. And I can't imagine an educator that doesn't want to improve outcomes for their students, because that's why we do what we do. But if it is just because of your own standard of the way you taught at one point in time or the way you think a classroom should be, is that more important on whether or not that educator is building a relationship with their students and whether it's working or not? So focus on the progress and the outcome, not on your definition of an input.
Okay. We've got another question in the audience. Do we have any online? Okay.
One of the big problems I've noticed over the years are people are highly educated, but incapable of taking that education and putting it into their hands. I first ran across that when I was in Iran. We were pastor, and the guys from the DU line would come down and they would say how that they were to train the Iranian people maintaining DU line equipment. I don't know what that was, but anyway, they could memorize the book, but that information didn't come into their hands. Okay, that was 55, 60 years ago. This summer at our church, a young fellow who's a missionary in Africa got his training as an airplane mechanic and trainer. And he found the same thing with African students, that they could memorize the book, but when it goes to actually fixing the problem, they were totally incapable. I have no answer for that. I see that as a big problem where many kids are highly educated, but don't know how to put that into practical everyday life.
I'll preface my response by just saying, you'll get my opinion, but if I had the answer to be able to solve that issue where I can make everyone a problem solver, then I would write a book and probably retire and fix every school system in America. But I look at the audience here and I see William, who presented at the North Dakota Council of Educational Leaders last week on the importance of AI and how that goes into K-12 education as well. And I think your question lands on a very important point. I'm a very big advocate of the embedding technology within education. I promote the use of AI in our school district, both in practices and for student learning, because I do believe that if I were to look at every state standard that students should be able to accomplish and master outside of classes designed specifically for creativity and authentic thought, whether it's some of our writing electives and some of those other classes, the highest level of showing mastery of a standard that you've learned is application. It's not rote memorization, and it's not your ability to use your own independent writing to reiterate a concept that's been taught to you. So I think that we need to be able to change the way that we assess student mastery to solve real life problems, and being able to utilize some of the tools that are at our disposal, such as AI, the internet, anything else. That should be a big part of it. So a leading researcher in education in the field of K-12 education is Bill Daggett, and he starts a lot of his presentations asking the same question, that if you have a challenge at work, how often do you raise your hand if you've ever leaned on someone that might know the answer to that problem or Googled the answer? And almost always majority of the audience will raise their hand. And then his first follow-up question is, then how come we don't allow students to do the same when we're giving them an assessment on whether they learned something or not? And I believe in that thought process. And I believe that you don't always need technology or having the answers to you. I think that there's different times for different things, and that's where you have to be intentional about what you do. Going back to what I said, not generalizing how you learn or what the concept of assessment of learning should be. But I think that we need to shift as a system to focus on how to critically think about the information available to you, how to apply that information to you, and do it in a meaningful and efficient ways using the tools that you have at your disposal.
Again, it's more of a follow-up comment. I mean, I do want to commend the Fargo Public School system for, so for one thing, generally, actually in computer science classes, I find that students who got education in this vicinity often have these application skills better than schools in some other countries, which is, yeah, so the blaming of the U.S. school system is not always completely fair in my view from that experience, and specifically from our experience with the Fargo public school system. There is a lot, and I'm not sure that I'm not sure how much it says about the curricular versus extracurricular. I think the extracurricular things very often have more of the application focus. The debate club and science Olympiad and science fair and those sorts of activities are very directly focused on application versus memorization. It would be great to have a discussion about the last point you made with regard to AI. I'm totally a fan of Google search, using Google searches constructively, using Wikipedia constructively. I'm not yet a fan of ChatGPT because it does not give the resources. That's the big thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. I wouldn't say that I'm sitting here as a fan of ChatGPT, but I am a fan of utilizing AI to solve problems when it can allow me to do something more efficiently. So I think, to the level of my own personal usage, I know the difference on when I'm going to use Google Bard versus ChatGPT versus other independent softwares that are out there. I would also contend that prompt engineering is a logical algorithm, and being able to understand the logic of what you're inputting to get an output that you want is a skill set in itself that could translate to what individuals can do. So I don't use AI for the purpose of a one and done and getting original information back. I personally use AI as a tool to make a process more meaningful. And then most importantly, I use AI in an iterative process to teach me how to prototype to get to an end product that I want, going through that logical model and sequence of what I have to do to go through that concept of what a good prompt looks like, what it looks like based on knowing. I know every time I use ChatGPT, whether I'm using 3, whether I'm using 4, or which of its plugins I'm using and what each of those are limitations are. I also know that when I use Google or when I use Bing, what their ability is to pull information from the internet as well. So it's being able to understand to that level and then apply that information that I think becomes a very valuable skill set. And I only do it because if I don't, I'm here to serve students. My own kids that are in kindergarten, I have a 3-year-old daughter. I mean, the future of education for them is going to be very different than even what I think it is today. So I have to just, for me, it's a part of my job and to be able to serve the students that were here.
Other questions? So one of the things as I was listening that I was thinking about is the connection across multiple stakeholders and people who work in the buildings. So you talked about restorative justice model. And so how about would you talk a little bit more about restorative justice and SROs acting in the school system? And you can ignore that if that's a bad question.
No, not a bad question at all. So it is a absolutely great question. I think in Fargo Public Schools, we don't employ our own police force. Our school resource officers are contracted through the city of Fargo and the city of Fargo's police department. The city of Fargo consistently has become national leaders in a true school resource officer model. They train a lot of the national police officers. Just like anything else, like I shared before, that does not mean that school system or the PD system don't have opportunities for growth and improvement. We're constantly reflecting on that. But I would put up in the last 3 years, we have significantly gone through 2 major changes in our joint powers agreement with the City of Fargo's Police Department, specifically focusing on the role of a school resource officer versus administration, looking at data accessibility for students, looking at things such as camera usage, when is available, when is not, especially with the police department employing body cameras as well. Does that become accessible to students, to school administrators or not for non-criminal purposes, right? And I think going through this process with the same understanding and same vision of always looking at things through a restorative lens has really allowed us to have one of what I believe is a premier partnership, and which is also codified in a joint powers agreement that I really think truly protects students, their rights, with clear delineation of the roles and responsibilities of both entities. I wish I could take sole credit for that. It's not. In 2017, my predecessor, Dr. Schatz, and the former police chief at the time, Chief Todd, they both went to Georgetown University to study the school to prison pipeline. And they really came back with a commitment to make sure that we are emphasizing restorative practices. We are emphasizing an opportunity for deterrence from the school to prison pipeline to the level that we can. And that becomes a constant focus. And today, joining us today is our general counsel for Fargo Public Schools, who worked with the city's attorney for greater part of almost a year and a half on fleshing out a joint powers agreement that I truly do think protects the rights of our students and makes it very clear that we don't have, to the best of our ability, we're minimizing any opportunity systemically to allow for policing in schools.
I'm pausing. Anybody online? Okay, online people, step it up. Come on. So I'm going to follow that up, if I may, with a question related to looking at not ACT scores, graduations, but going more granular. And you talked about where you had room for improvement with students of color, Native students. So we know that if we've read some of the literature that little people, from kindergarten on up, are students of color are not always treated and viewed their behavior the same way, which then affects the graduation rates and all of that, which also is affected by whether or not they have a role model in the classroom and all of those things. So I just gave you like 3 different opportunities to talk about your thoughts related to those, the goal of helping more students be successful as adults.
Yeah, I think if you were to unpack why we have parity in outcomes and disparities in outcomes in education, what a lot of the research will tell you is that there are a myriad of factors that impact where students' starting points are, but there aren't a myriad of factors that really prevent a student because of their starting point to be successful should they have educators that believe in them, hold them to high expectations, and employ a lot of the best practices, right? But at the end of the day, we are in the human business. And I don't think that we will ever have a system that's completely perfect. So our organization has a strategic plan. Within our strategic plan, we follow a theoretical framework. So we strongly believe in systems thinking, and I am a geek for leadership literature. So Edward Deming, who does a lot of work around continuous improvement, based off his work and the work of Peter Senge, who wrote the book, The Fifth Discipline and the Art of Becoming a Learning Organization. What we do is we've changed our shift. We've changed our shift from trying to hit, saying that as an organization, we're trying to hit one graduation rate at one point in time or one test score at one point in time, to we define our success by being able to look at what's working, what's not, making the improvements in the areas that's not, and getting better every single day. We know that there's no public school district in America that has 100% of their students hitting 100% of the benchmarks 100% of the time. And we know that our system produces inequities and gaps for marginalized students. So we've shifted our focus to making sure that we're holding ourselves accountable to never allowing the same group of students to fail from our system repeatedly. And that's happened until now because that's why we have so many of the disparities in outcomes. But we know that our focus today on increasing our Native American graduation rate, because that is what's lower in our system compared to their counterparts, might be 20 years from now, that same work might have us focusing on are white Anglo-Saxon Protestant middle-class students, because at that point in time, the system might have shown a trend of them not getting the educational justice they deserve. So our focus has now become, how do we become a learning organization that knows how to look at data, how to look at a gap so then that no gaps consistently repeat itself. And when they do, then we're holding ourselves accountable to saying, why are we allowing the same students to be marginalized by our own system? And if we can't be that reflective and introspective, then I think that we're going to continue to see some of these pieces. I think it's no secret that young men of color are over-identified in special education. I think young men are often shown to have more disparate outcomes. Young females of color, I think, have more disparate outcomes in K-12 systems across the nation. And this is where we have to go back to that 5 why analysis and really take a look at where is those discrepancies coming from in our system and why, and be able to truly change and adapt your system accordingly. So I think there's a lot of work behind that, a lot of packing and a lot of research, but I think you have to be very granular in your focus and never be satisfied for where you are if you're truly committed to self-improvement and organizational improvement as well.
Oh, we have a question online.
From yours truly, I think. My question is for students in elementary where they have such a structured day from classes, specialists, lunch. Emotional and social regulation is such an important skill set that students are learning at that age. Um, is the school or is Fargo Public Schools using recess, things like that, as a punitive function when they need that amount of play, 45 minutes or so per day, just to de-stress and all those types of things too?
That's a great question. We're not using recess in a punitive way just to give students like a break, but our recess built into our schedule has been done through a wellness committee that looks at our overall wellness policy, that looks at the role of recess, what good recess should be for the purposes of promotion of social emotional learning, along with other pieces as well. The North Dakota Department of Public Instruction considers recess as instructional time because they think that's valuable for students in that point in time. That being said, I think one of the struggles for us, not just within the school system, but as a society, is that we don't, when it comes to mental and behavioral health and the need for social emotional learning, I don't think that we have a clear standard of when learning stops and treatment begins. So TNT Kids and Fitness, TNT Kids Fitness is a great partner of Fargo Public Schools. When they communicate a set of services that they provide through their sensory gym and through some of the activities that they do, they talk about movement therapy. Therapy is a service that's provided by a healthcare provider or a service provider based on their expertise. Oftentimes that we believe that we can solve some of the mental behavioral challenges or even some of the work that students need that manifests itself into behaviors in schools through education. And I think both are necessary. I think that we can provide whole group education, promote opportunities for social emotional learning. But I also think that part of the reason that we have some students that are over-identified to have a disability in our school system and in every school system, frankly, is because we're putting educators in a situation where students might need treatment and educators don't have any other tool in their tool belt besides providing an educational accommodation. And unfortunately, what that does is that a student that truly needs treatment to learn the coping mechanisms to deal with deregulation techniques or some other pieces, that's not an academic accommodation. And sometimes unfortunately, what that does is when an educator has to provide an academic accommodation because they have no other tools in the tool belt, we're supplanting or we're replacing their academic need with what we believe to be a social emotional need. And thus we're lowering that expectation for that student's academic success as well. And I think that's a challenge as a society that we need to be able to figure out. Today, I know where my role and responsibilities for my physical health starts. And I know when that line is crossed to go to a doctor. I understand that the environment, the air I breathe, the water I drink, the food I eat is in my control. I understand that if I'm a student at a school district, what the school nurse can do, but I also know that, okay, after a certain point, I need to go to a doctor to get medication or get a diagnosis for this treatment that I need and to follow that plan. When it comes to mental and behavioral health, we don't know where that line is that separates our individual responsibility versus a school's responsibility versus now going into treatment. And without those clarities in that line, what happens is that we try to use academics to provide treatment, and you're making educators healthcare providers, which they're not. And we don't believe in mission creep and we don't want to be, but we also have no other choice at that point in time.
And you've identified in that statement, you also are talking about the lack of sufficient resources in behavioral and mental health, which brings me back to another question, unless somebody else has one. Okay, my next question is, we know that teachers are struggling. What is your school system doing to support teachers and actively recruit teachers? And why should they become a teacher in this environment?
So I'll start with the last question because I think it's the most important. I think people should become any educator because it's a purpose, and to me, it is a calling to some level. This coming from someone that never thought they would be a teacher. I didn't go to college to become an educator, and then I joined an education program and ended up staying because I found that that's where I could provide um, most value. But I also think that a job should not be something that you view as a job. It should be a passion that you love. And I wake up every single morning happy to do what I do and going to work. And I think anyone should find that profession, whether it's becoming a teacher or not. I do think teachers are struggling uh, because that's often the conversation that's been shared. And again, I think sometimes we have a product of generalizing a problem. I would not doubt that some teachers are struggling. But I also know that there's many, many, many teachers that are thriving. And going back to some of the earlier questions I'd said, I would want to ask a question: what does struggling mean? Um, I don't know, and what does that data mean, and what does that data look like? I think being able to get granular in terms of what are the expectations, and if you have clarity in this is your role as a teacher, this is the environment that you get, this is what your lifestyle is going to look like. I think the biggest thing that you can ever do to any prospective employee is provide them clarity, because I do believe that clarity is kind, and I believe that if they have clarity, then there aren't expectations. So I think sometimes struggle could be a reflection of disappointment, and that could be a disappointment because things aren't the way you thought they were going to be. To me, that's a root cause of maybe a lack of clarity. Maybe they could be a disappointment because things didn't go your way, right? And I think I try to stay away from those generalized narratives to really try to dive deeper into what are the specific issues. Uh, there's no secret that the pipeline for educators is going down um, compared to where it was before, but that's also reflective of our community salary, wages, and how much we value education as well. So I think that the continuous war on public education doesn't help. If we are talking about one of the largest employers in your town, your city, your county, that's still going to be here 100 years from now. Uh, if that's truly something that we all believe in and their power to change the world, then I would say then let's take a look at the metrics in terms of salaries for educators versus the cost of inflation compared to any other profession. And I don't think this is just true for education. I think a lot of public sector industries that are service oriented have to some level been crippled by a notion of success in a privatized market. And unfortunately, when it came to healthcare and education, we don't have the ability to privatize for an intended outcome that's different than serving our population, because we're not revenue based. We're here to serve students no matter who they are. We want to serve every student that belongs to our school district, meet them where they are. And that's a different level of success compared to a potential private sector. And that's something that I think sometimes is handicapping for public institutions.
So let's talk about a happy thing now.
Yeah.
You talked about critical thinking and assessment, and you also talked about private, and then my brain just went out. Problem solving and the connection between art and innovation and those things. So it's the STEM conversation. Talk more about where you see the role of the arts and literature and all of those things in helping round out a student's education.
Thank you. I think all of whether we're talking about a focus on science, technology, engineering, arts, mathematics, or any other specialty, I think all of those pieces are critically important to round out an education for a student. I don't think the work is really convincing educators. We operate, especially in Fargo Public Schools, from the premise of try to provide as many opportunities as you can for students, because no two learners are the same. What does need to shift, though, there is community expectations on what a school system is and how a school system success is defined. So in one of my first slides, I had an example of a dilemma that said student experience versus student achievement. And if you go back to the notion of limited amount of pots and resources, then we have to then recognize that the success of a school district should not be based on one measure of achievement that we dictate at one point in time, whether it's a third grade score or fifth grade score. It should be based on the alignment of their resources to both the student expectations and the achievement that the community that they're serving expects. It's a real easy example that I can give in Fargo Public Schools. We know that in the FM area, we are very happy to be the operating arm of a premier fine arts program and summer program in the Trollwood Performing Arts School in our community, and the main stage musical they put out. That comes at a significant cost to the district year after year. And the conversation I have with my school board is, if you only want to focus on third grade reading scores or seventh grade reading scores, I can get there. I can take the same budget for Trollwood, which I would never want to do, and translate that to a very highly research-based practice that, maybe tutoring or whatever the case is. I could double block kids in reading and math and put them 4 hours a day to only focus on their tested subjects. I can also disrupt a campus feel and the brand identity of a campus by moving teachers around year after year to make sure that always my best teachers are working with the lowest performing students. I've done turnaround work. We could do some of that work, but then we're missing the mark on the student experience that our community wants us to do. So that's why I also stay away from comparative conversations between school districts, because I think the true success of an organization is the alignment between your resources and the work that you do to get the outcomes that you truly desire, versus just making one assessment at one point in time. So I fully promote the opportunity for a variety of different ways for students to learn. I also don't believe that students have to learn in a very traditional model or traditional content or traditional assessment mechanisms to show mastery of a certain skill. I think that we can prepare students for the future by allowing them to be critical thinkers and problem solvers. But I do think that we have some work to do in making sure that our community defines the success as providing students with those opportunities.
Thank you.
So earlier you presented the needs of the students who are sort of at the upper end versus lower end as a dichotomy, and in your answer right now that came up a little bit too. But I mean, one of the things that we do at NDSU sometimes is that there's a learning assistant program where the top performing students get assistantships that aren't even particularly lucrative, but they get to then tutor the students at the lower end, and that still teaches the students at the upper end in the sense that they get to actually explain what they learned, which the instructors who use them often feel that the learning assistants learned at least as much as the students they're teaching. I'm not aware that there is such a system at Fargo Public Schools. Is this something you do or consider? Or
I guess I the last part of the question. I don't know.
well, I mean, do you have anything like that, or have you considered something like that, or tried it, or to let the top performing students tutor?
Oh, have we looked at like a student tutoring? Yeah, so we peer-to-peer instruction and how we pair students, whether it's when to use heterogeneous groups and homogeneous groups for peer-to-peer instruction or student-based instructions. Those are conversations that happen at the independent teacher level for each class, but those are strategies that we utilize. So peer-to-peer tutoring is actually one of a highly effective strategy, based on, there's a leading researcher called John Hattie who does a meta-analysis on the biggest impacts of student achievement. He analyzes peer-to-peer tutoring. We do provide some of those opportunities within the classroom, but we also do have some structured models in Fargo Public Schools that students can utilize either. So some of our programming right now for accelerated instruction allows students to work with other students within the classroom and provide some of those opportunities. We also try to create some of those pathways within a specific career field as well. So we in Fargo, we have a in-house teaching program as well for some of our students. And the beauty of it is our students at high school right now can go to some of our elementary schools and provide student teaching experiences and doing some of those things while they're sophomores and juniors in high school and working with some of our lower students as well. So.
Okay, we had one student question. Any other student questions, observations? If not, Walt has another question.
One of the things I've learned in many occupations, we have burnout. What is the school doing to prevent burnout? I've seen it in everything. I was in the printing trade, you have burnout there. I have worked with teachers, burnout, and I have also worked with a lot of pastors, and we're dealing with burnout. The key to education is always the personnel that lead. So what kind of program do you have to prevent burnout?
I think we're in the same boat as everyone else. You know, we're doing everything that we possibly can. Does that mean it's enough? Probably not. Does that mean that it's going to be the end all be all solution, whether it's focusing on employee mental health, making that a metric and something that we're doing, making sure that we're providing more opportunities to check in with our employee, making sure that we're also providing counseling services and other services for our employees. Those are all things that we do. At the end of the day, I think burnout also is in my personal opinion, is also a reflection of losing purpose or losing hope in like what you do. And I think that our job is to make sure that our employees see the value that they're providing every single day. I also think burnout can be a result from unrealistic expectations or different markers that diminish the light that you have for or the passion that you have for what you do. So how do we make sure that that's a central focus? And that's where I go to some of those conversations around accountability, around the culture wars on education, around some of the other challenges that we have to deal with. I think for us, it's always bringing our teachers back to saying, hey, your goal is to just focus on whether your students are learning or not every single day, and being reflective and being better. It's not trying to hit this one marker at one point in time, because I know that I rather hold you accountable to being reflective on whether your students are learning or not, and making those changes and giving you the independence and the autonomy to do your work, versus solely saying that I need you to do X, Y, and Z because that's the way I've always done it. So we as an organization this year, our leadership book study was focused on a book by Stephen Covey Jr. called Trust and Inspire Leadership. And the premise of that book really is to say that as we transition to a new workforce, we have to recognize maybe 5 fundamental shifts that need to change from today's workforce to what the next generation workforce is going to be. And one of those shifts is recognizing that individuals want more choice and autonomy, both over their time and the decision that they make and how they use their time. So you should hold them accountable to an end product versus how to get to that end product. And that will allow them to feel more inspired to keep working, even when the time gets tough.
Thank you. And I think with that final comment, we will wrap for the afternoon. Thank you so much for your observations. I think it's as much about leadership and ethics as it is about education. It seemed like all 3 of those things were hit pretty hard and well. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you to those of you online, even though you were lazy with your questions. And for those in the room who asked questions and joined us for this conversation, on behalf of the NPEI, thank you and have a great day.